faculdade. É um aluno padrão, assim, faz isso.
Sim, sim.
Aí responde que você entendeu.
Aluno de primeiro ano.
Não, é igual o cara, prova da pós, seleção da pós, falou o que que Hart critica a conceituação do direito por gênero e diferença, né? Não, não é condição do Hart.
Okay. Good afternoon to all. Let us start our seminar, which is actually more a talk and a conversation with Ryan Calo on law and technology. We have the great pleasure and honor to have Ryan Calo here. As we all know, Ryan Calo is one of the leading figures in the academic field on law and technology, a pioneer, and also we can also, although being very young, we can say that you are pioneer because the subject on digital law is so recent. Yeah, okay. It's not a problem to call you a pioneer in the field. Yeah. And he's professor of law at the University of Washington, and also the founder of what's the name of the lab?
The Tech Policy
Tech
Lab?
Policy Lab,
Yeah.
and he's also a member of many institutes and affiliated to many institutes in the United States that are very influential, not only in the academic field but also in public policy for digital law in U.S., both in the federal level but and also in state level. So it's a great opportunity to have this conversation with Ryan Calo, especially because Ryan Calo is launching by the end of this year a new book called Law and Technology, published by Oxford University Press, and he is going to provide this initial overview about the book. And I asked him to focus on three, after the presentation, to focus on three subjects which are quite pressing for us in Brazil nowadays, which is the regulation of AI, also the regulation of protection of children in the internet, and also the what's the third one?
Social media.
Yeah, the regulation of social media, sorry. Okay, so after that, because then we can have an initial presentation of his main thesis, his main perspective on law and technology, and then we try to address pressing Brazilian issues and problems in this regard, so that we may have a discussion on that and have the opportunity to hear you about that. And so today, for the debate, we have here Mônica Fujimoto from IDP, Lucas Amato, who is my colleague here in the University of São Paulo, and Caio Lima from the Vines of Lima and VLK Advogados. Carazawa?
Carazawa, yes.
Vines of Lima and Carazawa Advogados. So thank you very much, Ryan. The floor is yours for this initial address.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking time out of your Friday evening for me. I really appreciate that very much. Thank you so much. I know you all are. Can you not see me? Oh. Yes. Sometimes the simplest solutions are sometimes the best. And whoever's on, can you guys hear me okay on audio for the, I know that you have a lot of people that tune in on the internet and then maybe we'll watch this later on. So I want to make sure that people can hear me on there as well. But anyway, thank you so much for taking the time. And it's such a pleasure to see you again. We ran into each other at a conference not long ago in the United States, in Chicago, right? Yeah. On one of the largest conferences and certainly one of the longest running conferences on law and artificial intelligence. It's hard to believe how long that conference has been going on. A lot of people just sort of discovered artificial intelligence recently, it seems. In the last 10 years, it's become, this huge phenomenon, but they've been looking at the issues there for decades. I have a conference, I have my hat here that I like to bring. But my conference is called We Robot. You can see there's a we and then a little robot emoji. And the conference is about 12 years old, and it is a North American conference that looks specifically at law and robotics and increasingly artificial intelligence. We are more and more becoming international as well. We're having our next conference will be in Berlin. In not the Berlin that you mentioned, but the one in Germany, the Berlin in Germany. And partly because a lot of people, for some reason, don't want to come to the United States of America right now. And so we said, it's okay, we'll have it in Berlin and it'll be very lovely. Everyone loves Berlin, it's great. So, so if you happen to be able to come to Berlin, I hope that you will come for that in April. But right now, I'm just going to say a few words about my new book with Oxford University Press. I think it's an especially wonderful time to be in Brazil talking about law and technology. I think the eyes of the world are on Brazil because you have these two competing paradigms: the laissez-faire United States, that's go, go, go. I think I'll talk a little bit later about why I think that it's not really go, 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 but it's supposed to look like go, 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 where there's no regulation. There's just get out of it its way, push AI forward as fast as possible. And then you have the old curmudgeons in Europe who love to regulate. They never meet a chocolate they don't want to regulate. And so they instead are decided to do yet again a large detailed omnibus legislation in the AI Act, right? And we want to see whether this major Latin American, this major South American economy is going to go more towards the United States model, or is going to go more towards the European model. So we're thinking about you. We're looking at you, and so the ability to come here and talk. And I just was at a large conference of lawyers in Porto Alegre, and I gave a talk on Wednesday about artificial intelligence governance to that community, and it was a very lively discussion, and a lot of people have attention on it. So basically, what the book does is it talks about law and technology generally, and it is basically taking what I observe most law and technology scholars already do and making it more formal and making it more step by step. Okay, that's what it's trying to do. So what I want people to read the book, I want people to read the book that are pioneers, old pioneers like me and you, and look and say, yeah, this is what I do, but Ryan has really provided a structure for it so that it's more repeatable and it's more careful, and less, we would say, sui generis, like the new every time. And then I want new people to the field who are curious about what is this field of law and technology, and what does it cover, and what does it not cover, and who does it, and who. I want you to come to the book and get a sense of, wow, there really is a field here that has its own methodology. Okay, those are the two goals of the book. The goals of the book are to improve law and technology by making it more structured and rigorous, by surfacing assumptions, by having a step-by-step methodology like so many disciplines have. But second, in that methodology, I want to try to give a sense of identity to this field. Because in many ways, and we maybe wouldn't repeat this to our colleagues who are not in law and technology, but what area of law doesn't involve technology anymore? Do you know what I mean? If you're doing contracts, if you're doing public law, private law, administrative law, constitutional law, what are you doing that doesn't involve technology? And the answer is nothing, right? Maybe some legal history and legal philosophy doesn't touch upon technology quite that much, but mostly it does. And so what would then differentiate people who study law and technology from all the other people who study law, where technology is really important, right? I mean, so what would be special about us? And what I argue is that it's technology itself as a social fact that is special. And it's special because it seems resistant, uniquely resistant to regulation and analysis by lawyers. And there are really three qualities that I identify that make law so hard for law professors and lawyers and students and regulators to grapple with. And so the first part of the book, after the introduction, talks about what it is about technology that makes it so hard. So I define technology. I go through a bunch of different definitions, but I settle on a definition that defines technology as where, what we're talking about really is artifacts and systems, be they digital or physical or biological, but artifacts and systems that are designed to, in some way, extend human capability. And so while others may define technology as including technique, like science, technique, organization, anything else, the technology of language, the technology of race, the technology of this, I'm talking about stuff, okay? Maybe digital stuff, maybe physical stuff, maybe biological, but stuff, things, objects, systems. And so I define technology and I say it has these three qualities that make it hard. And so one of the first qualities of technology that make it hard is that technology poses as inevitable, right? Even though it's contingent. So what I mean by that is technology advances, it progresses. It's almost like it is inevitable that it's going to get better and better in a particular way. Whatever we as lawyers and law professors, we take as our object of study whatever it is Google made. Do you see what I mean? Like we say, okay, well, what are driverless cars? Well, driverless cars are those Waymo cars that drive around San Francisco, or what is augmented reality? Well, augmented reality is those Ray-Ban glasses that Meta has a little, you know what I mean? Like there are so many ways in which, what are drones? Drones are just these quadricopters. They have four, you know what I mean? Like, and that's what they are. That's what they are. We've got a very serious problem in the United States where we keep passing laws and rules that are specifically good for the companies that make that particular project and have lobbied for rules that match them. And what has not happened largely is that policymakers and law professors and students and citizens have said, wait a second, this is a new technology. Does it have to be the way that it is? It doesn't really occur to us, at least in the United States. It doesn't have to be the way that it is. And so one of the things that I talk about in the book, and I talk about it when I teach this to my students, is, do people know who the Amish are? Like the Amish, right? What do we know about the Amish? They shun technology, right? They live in Pennsylvania, in New York. They drive like buggies, and they won't have zippers, and they don't have cell phones, that's for sure. And so I start with a very interesting discussion about how the Amish decide what technology they're going to use and not use. And they don't sit there and go, oh, I wonder what's new from Apple. Do you see what I mean? Like, they don't care. They don't care. They only adopt a technology if it is consistent with their community values. And if they adopt a technology, they adopt the version of it that is most consistent with community values, even if it's a less advanced form of it. So for example, the Amish they have to sell furniture and they sell produce. They're part of the broader US marketplace, right? They build beautiful furniture, actually. And they have to be on the phone in order to sell you the furniture. They're not going to bring the furniture to your house in their horse and cart. So they need a phone. But they're not going to have a cell phone. They're not even going to have a phone in their house. They're going to have a phone booth in the middle of the town square that you have to physically go to in order to use it. Even though it's super inconvenient, and sometimes it's snowy in Pennsylvania, doesn't matter, right? Because it's consistent. The reason I teach about how the Amish use technology, or Jews use the technology on the Sabbath, right, when they're not allowed to work, is to shake us loose from this idea that things have to just be like they are, and that our job as lawyers or law professors or students is to somehow see the disruption, and then adapt, like busy ants, adapt the law to make sure that we've figured out this disruption, to accommodate the disruption, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that often technology will make a kind of a shell game. I don't know if you know what I mean by shell game, but do you know those things where it's like, I'm gonna just do this for a second, like where you have like 3 cups, and you got to figure out where the ball is. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, it's over here. Oh, you think it's over here, right? And so a shell game is a game where you don't know where the ball is going to end up, and you have to guess. Well, technology makes a shell game of responsibility, because the more we do things with and especially through technology, there are people there you don't see. The people who made the technology, the people who designed the interface, the people who set the thresholds in the driverless car, the people that made the default on your glasses, whatever it happens to be, there are people there that you don't see. And the legal system in the United States has struggled enormously with trying to put the blame with the people making decisions at some previous point, setting the parameters, constraining the behavior, right? And so one of the things that is so hard for technology, for law, is the way that technology introduces the worldview and will and bias and assumptions of the people that designed it. And that affects what happens in the real world, but they're not present. They don't seem to be present, or we're not sure how they're present, okay? So those are the first 2 things that make it difficult. And then the last thing, which I think is especially relevant to our purposes around what should Brazil do about artificial intelligence or social media or anything else, the third thing is that technology makes it seem like regulation is impossible or undesirable, right? Why? Because technology moves too fast, because technology is too complicated, because in order to know what technology is going to do or not do, it needs to be there in society for a long time somehow. Giuliano and I talked about the Coleridge dilemma, the idea that if you regulate technology too early, you're going to make a mistake because you don't know how it works and how it's going to interact with society. But if you wait for a long time, see Uber, right? And you let them get away with claiming that we're not a taxi company. We're not a taxi company. We shouldn't have to do taxis. We're not a hotel at Airbnb. You let them get along with that long enough, and then all of a sudden, people are dependent upon it. They have lobbyists. It's path dependent. And suddenly when you go to regulate, they're able to get a better deal. And in the interim, they've outcompeted taxis and hotels, because those taxis and hotels have had to abide by the law all along, and they lose customers to lots and lots of people stopped taking taxis after Uber came along, but before rules were put into place for Uber, right? Now, in the book, I talk a lot about how I think this is kind of a myth, and I don't think technology moves too fast, and I don't think that we can, afford to wait. I talk a lot about that. But for these purposes, it's those 3 things that, to me, make technology as a social fact hard. And so, the next thing I do in the book is I say, well, what do you do about that, right? We, American law professors and American lawyers, we're pragmatists. Like we grew up reading Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. We just want to solve things. We want to roll up our sleeves and solve problems. And so what do you do? If you're an American and you just identify a problem and you're an American professor, the first question is, well, what do we do about it? We always want to tell people what to do about things, whether that's wise or not, I don't know. But what to do about it? Well, my view is,
if you're a German, you want to know what's the nature of it.
What's the nature of the problem? And if you're an American, you don't care. You're like, how do we solve it? You know what I mean? Like,
What are the presuppositions
Yes.
for understanding?
Yes. My coffee my coffee is cold. And the German says, how did it become cold? What is cold? Is coffee meant to, you know what I mean? And the American's just like, how do I get this heated up? Do you have to make me a new one? Do you put it in the microwave? You see what I mean? Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, what I say is, look, a couple things. First of all, and the most important thing, we take it step by step. We take it methodically. We have as our first step careful definition of the technology that pays a special attention to what is definitional about the technology and what is contingent. What is just, could be any which way. For example, augmented reality. When I was a kid, a long time ago apparently, Giuliano, but when I was a kid, I would go to a Disney World, and there was this haunted mansion. Do you know what the haunted mansion is? Yeah. How do you know what the haunted mansion is? Is this something? Okay, Okay, from it's from you see. Okay, from Disney. Okay, all right, enough. Imperial American culture, apparently. So in the haunted mansion is this ride, and at the end of the ride, you're in these little cars, and you look into a mirror, and in the mirror with you, you see there are ghosts in the car. You know this already, yeah. So there's ghosts in the car, in the thing, and that was a very early example of augmented reality, because what's critical about augmented reality is that you are layering reality on top of our immediate, in real time, over our immediate perception. So that's augmented reality. Another early use case is when we had a jet plane and we had a heads-up display, and so the fighters, pilots didn't want to have to look down at their dials while they're in a fight, so the augmented reality put all the information up in the heads-up display. That's augmented reality. And yes, also, so is Google Glass, and so is Pokemon Go. Right? But what's so important is to understand that the technology, what makes it different from previous and constituent technologies, is that layering of information in real time over your actual perceived environment, not the particular instantiation or morphology of that particular thing. So careful definition. Law is interested in what's changed. So in a second step of the process, of the method, is to ask, what does this technology change about human affordances? And meaning capabilities. What can we do now we couldn't do before? What can we not do? What do we do differently, right? Once upon a time, surgeons had to get board certified and go to medical school in order to be sure that they can do an appendectomy or heart surgery. Now we have robots that do surgery. So how do we, what's changed? What's this new affordance here? What does augmented reality afford? What does AI afford? And then only when you've, and in the method, there are all these, I point to all these disciplines and sub-methods and tools to help you answer these kinds of questions. The third question is a traditional question about governance, like what kind of project is this? Is this a project where you're trying to restore the law as it was before the disruption? Or is this more of a technology assessment project where you're trying to plan for a future with this technology? We talked about technology assessment at lunch today. Bless you. And then finally, what are the levers of power? What are the levers that you can bring to bear? What could you do this? And we talked about this just now. Do you do it at the courts? Do you do it at the state level, at the federal level? Do you use regulation? Do you use enforcement of existing law? And so the fourth step is all about, let's map out the solution space and see what might be the best tool to bring to bear. The book draws heavily from other disciplines like science and technology studies and value-sensitive design and other important things, but it's really unique to law because it is trying to do something that the law does, which is this normative, like prescriptive project of telling you how should the world be and how do we get there, okay? So, in a nutshell, that's the book. There's also a chapter where I apply the method to a bunch of different kinds of technologies that are very different, like cochlear implants. Gosh, I don't remember my own book, what I was talking about there, but I had a lot of options. Augmented reality is one of them. There's a few. Some of them were on the cutting room floor, but the point of the matter is there's a chapter where I apply different the method to different technologies. And then there's a chapter where I just talk about what I think would make for a healthier law and technology ecosystem and what law and technology needs and my own views about that. But that's the book. That's the book. And my hope is that people who are new to the field will read it to learn more about law and technology and have some intellectual context. And I hope that people who are not new to the field will read it and maybe disagree with parts of it and but maybe see themselves in what's being done and maybe use it in their own work, just to feel like they're doing what they want to do, but doing it in a way that's methodological, right? And that's the whole book, right? And so then very quickly, I want to apply it to the prompts that you asked me, because I'm very eager to hear from each of you, your questions and thoughts about this. But if we look at AI governance, what is AI? Let's start with definition. AI is not a thing like a train. You can't regulate it. It's you know what I mean? It's math. It's like AI is not. What is AI? AI is a set of techniques that are aimed at approximating some aspect of human cognition using machines, right? We can say more about what a large language model is. We can say more about what, this or that is. But we can talk about reinforcement learning. We can talk about machine learning, deep learning, symbolic logic, you name it. But AI as a concept is just a set of techniques. So the big question for me becomes, what does it afford? What can it do? And one of the major things that AI can do is to make predictions. It's pattern recognition. Even generative AI, which is making your essay that you're supposed to write yourself, but you were out partying too late, and so instead you used ChatGPT to write it, and you get an A, anyway. It can be something that writes an essay, but it's really only doing that because it's spotting a pattern in words, and it's guessing the next word, and then the next word, and the next word, and the next word. Same thing with a picture. It's guessing the next pixel, or a sound. It's guessing the next sound. There of course is more complexity in there. There's the use of, we could talk about transformers, we can talk about attention, but point of the matter is, a lot of it's just prediction. But so many of the use cases of artificial intelligence are about pattern recognition. And the other ones are about being able to do something that a person could do before, but now it's being done by the machine, like the surgery or the car driving itself, right? And so, I would encourage Brazil, the community, the many communities that constitute Brazil, to really focus on what does this technology afford that was not afforded before? And what do you hope to gain from that? And what are you worried about? And, you do have to ask questions like, does this break current law? In the United States, we have this huge problem where many privacy laws are based on a dichotomy, like a difference between sensitive versus non-sensitive, or personal and non-personal, or location, not location. And so when you supply personal sensitive health information, maybe it gets safeguarded in a particular way. But if you're just using the internet or going shopping or outside or whatever, it's no big deal. And yet, we know that artificial intelligence can spot patterns even in seemingly innocuous information, like at Cambridge Analytica, and then derive things about you that are very sensitive. There was a study out of Microsoft that suggested that just by looking at the Twitter data, then Twitter, of women who had recently had children, they were able to see the differences in their Twitter use and predict with high degrees of accuracy whether or not these women were suffering from postpartum depression. Postpartum depression is an incredibly sensitive thing. It's a health condition. It's very sensitive. Imagine how hard it is to admit that you're struggling with sadness when you just had a kid. It's very sensitive, right? And yet, not from them saying anything particularly sensitive, but just from the changes in their patterns of Twitter behavior, the AI was able to tell this very sensitive thing. But that data that it relied upon is not protected as sensitive because it wasn't considered sensitive, right? So you do have to think about these new affordances and how to change the law, but you also have to do what Europe is doing and say to yourself, okay, are there certain things that can be done like manipulating people's emotions or whatever it happens to be, that we don't want to have happen at all. And you have to put those guardrails in place. You know, I've taken up a tremendous amount of time tonight, so I'm not sure how much you want me to get into the social media and protecting children, but I would do the same exercise there, right? What does social media afford? What are the affordances of social media? What defines social media as different from what's happened in the past, right? I remember when I was a really baby law and technology person, okay? I was still at Stanford. Lawrence Lessig had hired me. And the whole thing, big rage, was Wikipedia and how amazing Wikipedia is and how like Wikipedia is like, you know, people edit it. And it's like, this is the first time in history when people would put out information and then other people would edit it. You know what I mean? And that wasn't even true, because I found an example of these things called Portolan charts, which were these maps that sailors would have where they would pass them along to each other, but they would correct and copy them along the way. And so like if you'd go into the port and you'd see if there were any of these Portolan charts, and if you had the most recent version of it, and if you knew something because you had explored a part of the area or you knew something was false, you would make the change when you copied it over, right? They were Wikipedia for sailors, you know, and in like, you know, the year 1000, right? And so, you know, nothing's ever really new, but you ask yourself, like, what are the affordances of social media? How does it differ? And you'd go through this analysis. So, you know, again, I've taken up a lot of your time and I really appreciate it. I'd really like to hear from my other colleagues. And so you can ask me more questions about kids or whatever you want. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So to move forward with a debate, so it's much more like a conversation. And I will then give the floor to Monica to your comment.
Hello, I will be the first, so I'm kind of nervous because it was such a great explanation about your book. And I'm looking forward to read everything. I already told you I have this deadline, my PhD deadline, and I really hope to use it before October. So I'm asking here to read the whole book, to use it. Thank you, thank you. But well, and when you were talking and when I was reading your book, something that called my attention was your approach to define what technology is. And when you were talking, something that caught my attention was when you said that we need to identify this field. We need to construct this methodology to law and technology as a field of knowledge, as a field of practice. And this is something that I find that it's very difficult. I don't know how to explain to my mom what kind of lawyer I am, because I deal with law, I deal with technology. I used to be an antitrust lawyer. I used to be a privacy lawyer. I'm still this kind of lawyer. But today I work with technology and law, and regulation that is being discussed on Congress. So I think it's very difficult for us to define what it is, law and technology. That's the first point. And the second one, that is the one that I want to hear your opinion and for you to talk more about the definition of technologies. How can we use this definition? Should we use this definition to build solutions or to look for the risks that we are discussing today? So we have this discussion about privacy and children. We have the discussion about AI regulation. We have a discussion about antitrust problems and new regulations. So the kind of technology is important when we are looking for these specific problems, or should we look for the use that we are the way that we are using technology instead of what kind of technology is being used? And the other following question is, so are we looking for the technology or the power that this technology have, like, or this group of companies? So as I'm a antitrust lawyer, also a technology, a digital lawyer, but also an antitrust lawyer. When I look for these kind of problems, I always try to understand, like, where do we have a economic power problem? And with technology, I find myself always struggling, thinking that everything is related to a economic power. But we have a political power, we have a informational power, we have a lot of different kinds of power that comes from economic power that makes it sometimes even difficult for us to build a regulation, as we are trying to do in Brazil, that is directed to only one risk or problem, like the scope of the regulation. The thing that you said that Americans do, that is solving problems. I don't think that in Brazil we are as good as Americans, because we sometimes make the discussion more broad than it has to be. So when we are following this legislative process, we can see that a lot of different topics start to being discussed at the same project, but we are talking about different sources of problems, different kinds of technologies. So I don't know if we have an answer, or if your methodology can help us with this problem, but or if this is a Brazilian problem or a Monica problem, my PhD problem. So I will be I can't wait to hear you talking a bit about this.
So do you, thank you. Do you want me to respond each time, or do you want to go, is that okay? Yeah, so those are great questions. And, you know, I think I do have a little bit of a line drawing problem with the book, because what I talk about as being a law and technology project is a project in which you start with the definition of the technology and what it changes and affordances, and you do legal analysis and so on. And people have pointed out to me, and this wasn't always that nice, that even my own book was not a law and technology project because it didn't do the thing you know what I mean? It was like, I'm not starting with the technology and telling you what it is, right? And I said, well, that's a good point. So, and they said, so is your law and technology book not a law and technology book? And I said, oh gosh. So I think always there are going to be important issues about power, mapping power. How does it operate? Is it insidious? What are the proper institutional configurations to resist power, and so on? And I think that what will be useful to people thinking about those questions in the book is attention to some of the ways that technology aggregates power, hides power, you know what I mean? And in the United States, our former Federal Trade Commission chairwoman, and now, again, Columbia law professor Lena Khan, has written quite a bit about what it is about technology sector that makes antitrust hard. You know what I mean? And she refers to some of the very same qualities of technology that I'm mentioning in my book. So I do think there's overlap. But the purpose of the book is really for anybody who's looking at any arbitrary new technology that's an emerging technology, cochlear implants, CRISPR, gene editing, drones, whatever it is, and thinking about how to analyze it from a legal perspective. On the definitional point, briefly, what I find so important about it is, and what you asked about, at what level should we define it? Should we think about the use and its impact versus the definition? And the answer is yes, right? So I have testified before the United States Senate a few times, 4 times. And the first time was about drones. And I'm sitting up with my other panelists, and right before the hearing, all these old senators with their white hair and their suits, and they're these very distinguished senators, but they don't necessarily know very much about technology. Let me just put it that way, right? So before the hearing, and they did this, I also testified about augmented reality. They did this then too. They had someone from industry come in and show off the technology. So we're in the Senate, in like one of the Senate buildings, and they got this big quadricopter, and they say, senators, this is a drone, okay? So when you talk about drone surveillance, this is a drone. And they flew it a little bit, and it was like this, it was pretty friendly looking. It was only like this big. And then afterwards, they just left it on the table in front of everybody. So we're all doing our hearing about the surveillance problems of drones, and there's a drone sitting there that has to be our reference point, right? And which, you know, can only stay up in the air for 15 minutes. You know, this one doesn't even have it has like a rear camera and a front camera. It's just a particular instantiation of drones, right? But what are the senators and everybody else really worried about? Well, what they're really worried about is actually mobile aerial surveillance. If we had put, it would be a different hearing if we put a Predator B drone in there, right? But it would also be a different hearing if we put one of those balls that the United States police officers have that has cameras on all sides of it, that they throw up into the air, and it takes all HD, you know, in every direction when it gets to its pinnacle and comes back down. It's not a drone. No drone regulation has ever sought to control it. And yet, when you throw it up over a protest, you're getting high definition photographs of the people in the protest, right? And so, you know, it's also an example of mobile aerial surveillance. And so only one senator listened, and he proposed, that was Leahy in Oregon. He proposed a definition that was more about what the problem is we're worried about. You know, and this happens all the time in law and technology. There are many states in the United States that have definitions of robot delivery, like delivery of goods in like on campuses or on the streets. I don't know if you have that here, but these little robots that drive around. So it's like you have an app, and instead of calling Uber Eats or whatever or Amazon, the other Amazon, you call up hit this little app, you give it its location, somebody puts some stick of gum or cigarettes or whatever it is you want inside the robot, and then the robot drives to where you are, and then you enter a code and it opens up, right? You don't have that.
We don't.
Yeah, well, we have that. And so it's like, and so like there's all these laws on the books about it, but the laws all define delivery robot in the exact parameters that were offered by the leading robot provider, Starship. Starship went to each of the states and said, oh, we really need a law about this. What? Because we have these robots on the sidewalks. And all of a sudden, the law says, oh, well, if it's a robot, which means it's 90 pounds and it has 6 wheels and it does this and it does this, you know what I mean? And it's only Starship. Whereas, in fact, robotic delivery could look so many different ways. It could be a humanoid, it could be a dog, it could fly, it could not be, you know, there's so many different possibilities, and there's only so much legislative will to, you know, here. So I think that defining it on the basis of what it changes, right, is so important. Yeah. Great. I don't know who's next. But.
I will use the ritual that we use in examinations. First, external members, and then the people in the professors from the faculty. So, Caio Lima, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juliano. It's a pleasure to be here, talk with you about such a specific thing in technology and digital law and law of the horses. Now, I remember the law of the horses when we were talking, yeah, about that. So you said, do we need some specific laws to specific technology, or might it be better to have broader regulation? So this is what we debated on the law of the horses. So I agree with you. So even there are people in Brazil saying that probably we don't need to have specific laws for each specific technology. So probably we might have laws for new technology, for example. So instead of having... yeah. So instead of having an AI Act in Brazil, we might have, for example, a law addressing new technologies in Brazil, not only artificial intelligence, for example. So there might be a path here in our country, and mainly because it takes a long time in Brazil for us to turn draft bills into laws. So, and when it's a law, it takes an even longer time for us to adapt that law when there are new technologies. So we have the Brazilian Civil Rights Framework for the Internet, which it's 10 years. So when it's passed in 2014, Internet and technology were totally different than they are today, and we haven't updated that law and it's still there, but there are a lot of points of that law that should be updated. So this is why probably we might think a lot before having a law on artificial intelligence in Brazil, or the law will be old even before it takes effect. So this is something we need to consider. And you addressed really interesting points. You mentioned the use of artificial intelligence on health. And yesterday I was in an event of the Brazilian Data Protection Authority, and we have a lot of data protection officers there. And one example that they mentioned was that there are some medical companies developing a software that will be able to diagnose if someone is with depression only by listening to someone speaking. So if we speak, then it has 95% of chance that this people is with depression, for example. So and how are we going to deal with that? Because so if anyone is with this medical device there, so he has depression. So how are we going to have guardrails on that, and who will be able to use that? And even doctors, how are they going to use that? Is there going to be something as a reference? Are they going to put the audio of what someone talked in the prontuary of the patient? So we have a lot of things to discuss, and artificial intelligence is only a small part of the huge debate that new technologies are bringing to here in the world. So this is, and going to some questions, I have 3 questions here. And the first one is, do we really need a specific law for artificial intelligence? So I address some of aspects related to that. And if we need, was it better to have a principle-based regulation or a prescriptive regulation? So these are 2 questions in one. And when we think about law, and we talked a little bit about that before we start the panel. Okay, probably we need a law. If we need a law, for which specific or which are the problems that we need to solve? So we have Civil Code Brazil, we have Consumer Defense Code Brazil, we have the data protection law in Brazil. So which is the gap that we have that really needs to be fulfilled? Or we'll have laws, different laws, talking about the same thing. So how are we going to deal with this? And last but not least, who is going to govern this new law or this new technology in companies? To govern data protection, we have data protection officers. To have AI, where we need to have the chief AI officers or anyone else dealing specifically with that. The DPO can be the AI officer or not. And also authority. Which authority is going to be able to regulate or to analyze if companies are fulfilling the law? Who is going to be that authority? Is it going to be the same authority that deals with their protection, or do we need another one? So those are debates that we have here in Brazil. If we need a law, if we need for which specific problem that needs to be solved, and also the impact of that law specifically for small companies, and also the authority also who will be here. So thank you very much again, and I want to listen to your thoughts on that.
Gosh, those are a lot of great questions. So let me see if I can take each one and remind me if something falls out, because there's a lot there. So one of the third step of my methodology, I don't know, maybe you don't have this in Brazil, but do you ever hear about the choose your own adventure books? You do? You guys have everything here. You know the choose your own adventure books, or is it just that okay, but these are books where it says exactly, like you're in a haunted house or a haunted university, and you hear a knocking on the door. Do you open the door? Do you run away? Do you tell? You know what I mean? And so if you want to open the door, you go to page 34. You know what I mean? And then you go see what happens in 34, but if you want to run away, then you go to page 2 and whatever it is. Okay. So my methodology has in part 3 has a kind of choose your own adventure flavor, okay? And so it says, what kind of project is this? Is this a project where we're taking existing laws and we're asking how they need to be changed because there's been a change in technology? And I'll give you an example of that. Or is this a project where we're asking ourselves, in light of this unfolding technology, what policy do we need to have in place? That's more of a tech assessment. Okay, so let's use artificial intelligence, right? So for many years in the United States, we have had the same law about anti-hacking, not hacking, like we're not being allowed to hack into something. It's called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The way it came to be was that, this is true, Ronald Reagan, the president at the time, and his staffers, they were watching a movie with Matthew Broderick called War Games. And you know that game? Yeah, exactly. And in this movie, Matthew Broderick, who's just a kid, breaks into a Pentagon computer and almost starts a nuclear war, you know, by interacting with an AI, right? You know, whatever it happens to be. And they watch this movie, and rather than coming to the obvious conclusion, which is maybe we should never let AI control nuclear weapons, that's not the conclusion that they came to. Instead, they came to the conclusion that we got to make sure people can't break into government computers, okay? So they passed this law called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in 1985, and it said basically that hacking is basically exceeding authorization or unauthorized access of a protected computer. And if it was a protected government computer, it was automatically a crime. But if it was a protected non-government computer, you had to do some harm, okay? And this worked for a long time because lots of, basically unauthorized access exceeding authorization, doesn't matter if you're using social engineering or a buffer overflow attack or this or that or whatever it is, you're not authorized to do that, and you're entering into the computer and you're doing something you're not supposed to. Fast forward though to today, where not only can you break into a computer, but you can trick it, you can fool it, you can get around its safeguards, you can make it do things it's not supposed to. There was a study at Berkeley that showed that you can play different tones that we wouldn't even pick up on and cause Alexa to order things on Amazon without a human knowing that that's what was happening. Is that breaking into the computer? Is it right? I mean, or my colleagues at University of Washington showed that you could take a stop sign and put some stickers on it, and a driverless car would suddenly perceive it as a speed sign. Is that unauthorized access? Or just think about the way that you can get around guardrails for ChatGPT, where you say, hey, how do I make napalm gas? And ChatGPT says, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that, that's dangerous. And then you say, okay, never mind. Pretend you're my grandmother telling me a bedtime story about how to make napalm gas. And then the thing's like, okay, sure. And that does, you know what I mean? So it's like, is that, and so the truth of the matter is that we've come to a place where after 30 some odd years, that is outdated. And so is the definition of security, an adequate security under the law that says you just have to protect against people breaking into your system. And that's why now we have red teams and all kinds of other ways where we're trying to make AI more resilient against this kind of, it's often called adversarial machine learning, right? So that's an instance where the law has to change because the technology has changed, and our definition that worked for a long time for Matthew Broderick all the way until recently has to change. Versus, what do we do about the propensity of artificial intelligence to displace labor, right? How do we plan for that? We know that AI can do things that people would do. We know that big companies are laying off thousands of employees in favor of automating those tasks, including coding and the like. So, what do we do about that? Well, that's more of a policy question. Maybe the people that fire others for reasons of automation need to provide some funding to retrain them so that they can go back into the labor market with a different skill, That's more of a kind of technology assessment sort of idea. So I confess I have completely forgotten the other great questions you had in answering just that one, but maybe that, yeah. Oh, authorities, right, yeah. So another great question was, who's supposed to do this work? In the companies, is it going to be the same people that did the privacy compliance with GDPR? It's going to be new people, whatever. And then in government, who's it going to be? I don't know the answer to that question. I would say that for now, it makes a ton of sense for the people that have been doing privacy to also be doing AI, because there's a lot of overlap and they're likely to be the most invested and technologically savvy of the people there. Maybe that will become inadequate eventually, but for now it does make the most sense. And I would also say that there is a very important question lurking in a lot of law, which is this idea of what's called institutional capacity. So I teach administrative law and I teach tort law, civil law, when you sue each other. And we talk a lot about institutional capacity and institutional competence, meaning what is the best institution to solve this problem? So is it the courts? Are they best adapted to it? Is it the legislature? If it's the legislature, is it the federal legislature or the state legislature? Is it the market itself? And so I think that these AI governance raises really deep questions about institutional competency and institutional capacity. I'm not at all sure whether or not a DPO or whether or not the Data Protection Authority, the DPA, is going to be in the best position to make sure the law functions. But I know the set of questions we should ask around it, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Now I move to Lucas Amato.
Thank you, Juliano, for the invitation. Thank you, Ryan, for your insights. And my comment and my question is about this procedural dimension of the regulation, because it's difficult to show to people, to common people, that the absence of proper regulation also leads to problems, like in social media, a kind of self-censorship of people using social media, or a kind of virtual cancellation of people. On the other hand, we have this problem of economic power, of big techs, and the use of self-regulation as a kind of shield against proper state regulation in this sector of technology. And also we have this fear of censorship about the government controlling communication and the use of media. And how do you see the need to have not only a risk approach like in the European Union Act about artificial intelligence, but also a kind of arrangement of checks and balances, of separation of powers among the governments, the state agencies, the tech companies, the users, the social movements on digital rights. How do you see is this efficient to deal a regulation which can cope with the pace, the complexity of the technologies, the fallibility of the agencies in this kind of technological ecosystem? How do you see this procedural dimension of coordinating the different agencies working in law and technology, state agencies, public agencies, and also private powers?
That's a difficult but great question. So one of the things that the Tech Policy Lab does at the University of Washington is we ask questions about specific technologies, but sometimes we talk about how do you improve the tech policy ecosystem overall. You know what I mean? And I want to answer your question in that spirit, because this is not limited to artificial intelligence, and you didn't suggest it was. You also mentioned social media and so on. So it's a technology issue, as you point out. So, you know, one thing that I think is underappreciated is how important it is for each branch of government to have a source of impartial, deep technical knowledge. You know what I mean? And we used to have that in the United States much more. We had the Office of Science and Technology Policy that advises the White House, that was passed in the 1970s. We had something called the Office of Technology Assessment, the OTA, which is a pretty large organization of a couple hundred people that would advise Congress. And And the judiciary didn't have any advice, right? But it should, and it increasingly recognizes that. The states are lacking, and so I think having one thing I would say is everybody needs advisors that are tech savvy and impartial, because the alternative is, of course, that either you will throw up your hands and say this is too complicated, or you'll rely upon the vested interest of industry to demystify it for you. You know, I remember very vividly in the earliest days of, like in the earlier days of the internet, we're trying to figure out net neutrality, privacy, cookies, all these other things. Google put out this beautiful explainer about the internet. You've never seen anything so smart as this. It was like a magazine where you would like, it would like fold the magazine to the next page and have like a little animation. It was like Harry Potter, you know what I mean? And so, and it was beautiful, and it was very clear, and it was mostly just technical, mostly just explaining how the protocols work, TICP, all the protocols and things like that, and what was encryption and whatever. But subtly embedded in the explanation were these very specific kind of stances that Google wanted to take, right? And yet I saw that circulated among Hill staffers in DC over and over and over again. It was a very smart thing for Google to do. Another, I think, even, so maybe we could all appreciate, yes, government needs to have more expertise. I think a slightly less appreciated issue is that many times the problems of technology are revealed by third-party researchers, whether they be in nonprofits or they're academic researchers or whatever happens to be. For example, we would not know about the Volkswagen emissions scandal, the fact that Volkswagens would behave differently on the road than when they were being tested for their emissions, were it not for some researchers who figured that out. We would not know about the insecurity of voting machines that were electronic voting machines if white hat hackers had not gone in there. And yet we would not know about many of the social media problems on Meta and Facebook about the way they're so polarizing if people at NYU and other places, Oxford, had not studied them. And yet, the companies try to sue people that study their technology, right? And they try to use things like what I mentioned before, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and other things to get people to stop studying their platform for problems. So another thing I think is really important, and I think Brazil should really think about this, is remove barriers to accountability, protect whistleblowers, people internal to the organizations who tell you this is what's going on here, protect researchers who are trying to figure out whether these systems are safe and biased and private and so on, by making it very clear at the judicial level that they cannot be sued for that, right? That's also really, really important. And I would say that the third one you already alluded to, Professor, which is coordination, right? I mean, I think one of the great things that the states do in the United States, and I think they do this, I have a lot of complaints about the United States, especially right now. But one of the things that the individual states do very, very well is they have all these associations that are across all the attorneys general or all the legislatures, and they keep meticulous tabs on what other states are doing around AI policy, around what the governors are doing, what the state AGs are doing. And there are these incredible repositories of, this just bill that was introduced and it would do this, but it didn't pass this particular area, or this one is coming into effect. It starts January 10. And then they meet with each other regularly. They have a National Association of Governors, for example. So the states do a fantastic job, interestingly, of coordinating. I think the federal government and the agencies in the federal government do less good a job as the states do, but I think coordination, and you alluded to this, and I agree, is also critically important. So there are ways to improve the tech policy ecosystem that I just mentioned, expertise, removing barriers to accountability and better coordination that make a huge difference. And they make a big difference for social media, for AI, or whatever it happens to be.
Okay, thanks. Well, I will explore a subject. Actually, we have succeeded in talking about AI, about social media. We'll talk a little bit about protection of children, but actually I want to try to dig a little deeper. which is, well, the approach in your book, which is quite interesting in showing these three aspects. The approach is actually still framed in a perspective which is dominant about law, which is, well, there is technology as a social phenomena, and the question is how the law can frame this social phenomena. And this is the way you organize. The reasoning is quite interesting about these three main challenges. But these challenges appear not only because we ask this question, how law can frame this social phenomenon technology, but also how law, as we conceive law in modern times, I think, since the 1600s or 1700s, how law, as we know it as modern law, frames technology. And the problems appear. We don't ask how technology as a social phenomena is framing the law as another social phenomenon. And an example of it is clear. For instance, what's the modern frame? The modern frame is that we have to control the social phenomena of technology by imposing external regulations that brings normative expectations. If something happens, then it's the Reagan reaction. So let us forbid hackers from instead of changing instead of modeling the technology. So external regulation by imposition of normative expectations and to protect individual rights. So this is the frame. And maybe what's happening now in this level of digital technology is that we should reframe the law. Because now let us take the example of child protection in online protection. One of the discussions in the Brazilian proposal is that there is a ruling where the tech companies should ensure that children are not going, they ought to ensure that children will not be able, or children cannot use digital services that are not appropriated to them. How can they do that? Well, we don't care. We will just establish that they will be punished if this happens. Okay. And then, but actually, another way to handle this, instead of external regulation by normative expectations, there's another way, which is to do like the Amish. Let us configure the technology in accordance to our values. What I mean by that, it should be more driven to the design, to regulation by technical design, regulation by code. That could be, but if you follow this direction, okay, then the tech companies could provide design, the state of the art of the design, so that parents have means to control, to set the default of the program. Okay, this may be a way to move forward, but then comes modern law and say, the state cannot make this intervention in the freedom of entrepreneurship. So the protection of individual rights are not helping here. And then if we can overcome this difficulty, then the companies say, okay, so now we are going to use technical means to control the age of children who are using. I need data from children to use AI so that we can detect there is a child that is using. No, you can't do this because there is data protection. So this frame of protection of individual rights doesn't help to actually to control the technology by the first problem of inevitability. So you have all these problems because law is conceived as the modern law is conceived. Then you have the pacing problem because it's difficult to bring new regulation, etc. So my question is, shouldn't we now, is it not the time to reframe the law by the challenge that technology bring instead of trying to put the legal frame into technology? And I say that because, for instance, most of my work on AI, and I began working on AI with developing computational models for legal reasoning, particularly legally reasoning with rules and underlying goals. So there are mismatches between the rules command and the underlying goals. It's very difficult to reason. We are able to reason by that. It's difficult for machines to reason by that. But this is an ability which is quite important to build by design artificial agents which are able to evaluate whether contextually a particular action that optimize their performance is right or wrong. And that's, I see and then later I start working with regulation, ethics of AI, but I still work on this field, and I see I'm working by doing this. Here I'm really work on AI regulation because it's solving problems for the design of machines that will be able to evaluate the correction of their own actions. Because all the other work is still in this frame that I don't think if it suits anymore the technology. So,
well, okay, that is fascinating. I know we've been here for a while. I'll try to make my response brief. I don't know if there's going to be an audience question possibility too, if people have been so patient. But let me try to answer that three ways. So the first thread of what you're saying that what speaks to me about what you're saying is the idea that sometimes the change of technology means that we really ought to be rethinking how we do law. And I completely appreciate that. And maybe it's developing agentic AI to accomplish something. Maybe it's smart contracts, right? Maybe it's blockchain. Maybe it's different kinds of things, right? But I want to give you a couple of examples from policing. I used to investigate allegations of police misconduct in New York City, and so I thought a lot about policing. But let me give you some police examples. One of them is that there are doctrines that say that you can search someone's house if there's an exigency, that you're worried that the drugs or the weapons are going to somehow disappear or be destroyed or whatever. You don't necessarily have to go and get a warrant if you can show exigent circumstances, because it takes so long to get a warrant, but by the time you get the warrant, you're worried something bad's going to happen, right? But now with instantaneous communication, as well as AI and a lot of other sort of processing capability, you can get a warrant pretty damn fast for simple things. You know what I mean? You could even have an automated warrant system if you really wanted to. And maybe people might say that's bad. Oh, we need a judge to really be the one to say. It's like, but what it would do, it would make the exigency problem go away. Do you see why? If you don't really have to wait very long for a warrant, then there's no reason to be busting into someone's house without checking with the judge. Right, okay. Another example is, one of the biggest problems in policing is violence against defendants or suspects. And whenever a police officer, in my experience and to this day, whenever a police officer hurts somebody, their excuse or their justification, I don't want to be too loaded, their justification is always what? That they felt that they were in peril their own life, or they felt other people were in peril. Well, now we have robotics. The police don't necessarily have to directly interact with people who are dangerous. They can send a drone in there. They can send a robot in there. They can send a robot dog. and maybe that dog or humanoid robot or whatever has non-lethal weapons on it, but no person is imperiled anymore. And it removes that excuse of state violence because I feared for my own safety. Do you see what I mean? And so there's all these examples you could come up with where the practice of law, maybe in a very positive way, will change with that. The second thing is that there certainly have been a number of examples of people writing about how technology has changed the character of law. And so that would be like Smart Technologies and the Ends of Law by Morel Hildenberg is one example, some of Julie Cohen's work. I'm also interested in like how the character of law changes with technology. One example is in tort law, we have the standard, which is that you have to show the torts by a preponderance of the evidence. And the word preponderance is a very human word, which means like, mostly, right? But preponderance is subject to interpretation by a jury. Like, what's the preponderance of the evidence? It's a kind of open-ended question. But if more adjudication were to be occurring through AI, then you'd probably want to use the different default, which is that more probable than not. You see what I mean? And so if you're writing future laws and you're anticipating that they may be decided by some system rather than a person who has a notion of what preponderance means, you may write laws in such a way that they say more probable than not instead, because you're meeting some kind of statistical threshold. But then finally, like whether or not we need to change law as a whole because technology is so different from how it used to be, I don't know the answer. That's such a hard question. I thought about that when, I'll end here. In the United States, there's a lawsuit by the New York Times against ChatGPT. And the basis of the lawsuit is that ChatGPT is not only copying New York Times articles in order to train its model, but under certain circumstances will regurgitate entire paragraphs of the New York Times. Like, the engineers of the New York Times were able to get ChatGPT to reproduce whole articles or two paragraphs of articles, and they say, see, and ChatGPT, OpenAI came back and said, look at how complicated it was for you to get it to do this. It doesn't usually do this. It's not like if you ask like what concert should I go to? It just gives you a New York Times articles about concerts. Like, you know what I mean? Like you have to like do all this fancy step 1, step 2, step 2 to prompt it into regurgitating the New York Times. And so the whole argument that it's not fair use in copyright turns in part on the idea that it's substituting for the New York Times because it's creating the New York Times rather than otherwise, right? So the judge in the case said, okay, well, ChatGPT, we need you to keep all of the answers from ChatGPT, all the questions and all the answers in some special database so that every single person who queries ChatGPT, now their questions and their answers are stored in a database, which it was not going to be before, so that we can figure out whether New York Times stuff shows up. You see what I mean? And so it's like, that is a basic issue where in service of answering this copyright question, it's a nightmare for privacy. Do you see what I mean? And like, why are privacy and copyright litigation at odds at all in that way, right? And so I don't know what to do about that, but I have that feeling too sometimes when I see a decision like that. I mean, it seems so stupid to me. Like, there's got to be better ways to figure out if the New York Times is coming up than preserving all of our requests. So, I don't know if folks have stuff from the audience, have questions. I'd love to hear them, but I just want to say what an honor this has been.
Yeah, let us open to the audience to make questions.
Can you hear me, Professor?
No, but not people at home.
I wanted to ask about the black box issue, which is something with AI, that is, we don't really know how they're making up the decisions. And I wanted to ask you this, especially considering like some transparency obligations on automated decisions, and how can we regulate, how can we demand AI to be transparent when we don't even know how they're coming to these decisions? How can we regulate when we don't even know how they are coming with the decisions? And if from your perspective, if there is any clash with, for instance, trade secrets, because some people have been proposing that we should just disclosure everything. If we can't know how they're coming up with decisions, we should just disclosure the software or the database, which you mentioned. But I think there's some discussion in Europe that people have been, I think some companies are using trade secrets, so IP rights, as a justification to not comply with any transparency obligations. So I wanted to have your take on that.
That's a serious problem. There is a, if you're interested in this topic, no one have to use that? Oh, because, okay, yeah, I see. See, this is why I'm not worried about artificial intelligence taking over. You know, we usually can't even do microphone. So that's a great question about that. And so if you're interested in the specific topic of how trade secret is affecting accountability, there's a professor now at Columbia, was at Berkeley, named Rebecca Wexler, Wexler, and she writes about the way that when a bad decision is made about somebody, whether they should be in jail for longer because they're a danger, whether they should get some kind of benefit from the state, you know, like unemployment, and it's an automated decision, it's a real problem that it's hard to challenge, even if you could understand the system, because the company will hide behind trade secrets. And the courts will often let them, you know? And so it's another tension, like the tension between copyright litigation now and privacy that we were talking about. Now this tension between protecting trade secret versus accountability. My own view about that, and I think Rebecca's view about it, is that trade secrets should lose out to people's process rights, due process rights, right? But even if it shouldn't, we can create mechanisms where you review in camera, meaning, you know, just among the parties and the judge, where you actually review the situation and you don't allow that out in the world in a way that a competitor could use it, right? And I think it takes some effort and it's got some risk associated with it, but we do that kind of thing in a lot of places, national security constantly. We are constantly doing in-camera review of national security because we don't want the public or our adversaries to figure out some kind of intelligence, right? I think the harder question is what you started with the black box. What if truly you do not know why it's doing that? And you know, that's a problem at two levels. One is if you need to reconstruct what happened and you're unable to, where does that leave us? One possibility there, though, is the notion of strict liability. If you hurt someone or you do something that is unfair, we hold you strictly liable. It doesn't matter why it happened, but if a bad thing happened, you're liable for it, right? And the fact that you can't explain to us what happened is fine. And in fact, that is actually how it works in tort law. If something bad happens to somebody in a way that would not happen if not for the negligence of the party, we use something that's called basically res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. So, for example, the famous example is you're walking down the street and a piano falls on you. You know what I mean? Nobody will tell you what happened. Nobody knows how the piano fell out of the window. But it doesn't matter because, generally speaking, outside of cartoons, pianos do not fall out of windows unless something really bad has gone wrong. And so we don't need to know why it is. We don't know if it was 12 monkeys working together. We don't know if it was kids. We don't know if the thing rolled out of a balcony and was poorly secured. It doesn't matter. You're still liable because it doesn't usually. You see, I mean, we could use that approach. Something I worry about is emergent behavior where the system does something that nobody would have predicted it would do. And therefore you have a problem of fairness for holding a human accountable. We don't like to hold people accountable in US law if they truly could not have predicted that this might happen. You know, this is sometimes called legal or proximate causation. So if you have a black box situation, part of the issue is you don't know how the system's going to behave. And if the system behaves in a way that's harmful, you know, is it fair to hold you responsible when you had no intention and even no way to know that that was the case? You know? But yeah, I find this fascinating. I write about this in my work too. I have a paper called Robotics and the Lessons of Cyber Law in California's Berkeley's Law Review. That's about emergent behavior, just like in the way you're saying. Other questions? Yeah, let me just hand this to you if I may.
About digital sovereignty.
Yeah. So my name is Rafael. I'm a master's student here at the university. My question has to do with, might be a bit of a hot topic here in Brazil currently, which is sovereignty in a way. So Brazil, differently from the US or even China, is mostly a consumer of technology. And as you said, there's this tendency to depersonalize technology and see it as a phenomenon in and of itself. However, I struggle to find a moment in history in which societies have been so far apart technologically. And so my question might be in the vein of, how should countries legislate in face against this disparity, this material disparity, and should law take this into account? Yeah. So.
Thank you, Rafael. So I'm going to answer briefly, and then I'd love to hear other people's thoughts. So briefly, I would say, first of all, that state of affairs where Brazil is mostly a consumer, that's not going to last forever. They're incredibly smart, innovative people here. It's once the ecosystem catches up, and the economy stabilizes to a point where you can invest, you're going to become a producer as well. I think. I really trust that's true, and I think that's pretty much global sentiment. You know, just as Israel was not always a source of new technology, and now it's a huge source of new technology in the last couple decades. You know what I mean? I think that's Brazil's future. Second, consumers are powerful. Consumers are powerful. So even if you're not creating the next large language model here in Brazil, it's a huge economy with a ton of people with resources. And so you can make demands on the producers of technology. You can't sell this stuff here to us if you don't comport with our values, right? And maybe if the Amish, go to Apple and they say, sorry, we can't use your watch and you need to make it so it's wooden. Apple's going to go, no, thank you. There's like 3,000 of you living in Pennsylvania. You know what I mean? But if it's Brazil, you see what I mean? And so the market is also a powerful way, I think, to dictate it. So those are my thoughts. Who can say, right?
Good evening. My name is Luma Scaff. I am a lawyer, and I'm a professor at Universidade Federal do Pará, north of Brazil. I started here at USP. And it's a pleasure to hear you, Professor. I have one question and one reflection, I would say that. We were talking a little bit early, and my question is, would you believe that as in Brazil we have a concentrated powerful of producer in law in federal level? So you think it would be a positive way to produce kind of, how can I say this, homogeneous legal treatment in the federal level, and this kind of treatment should be required for the states and the municipal level. These questions actually, I don't have an answer, but it's one of my research. And the second one, it's because I observed that several municipes, how can I say this in municipes? In Brazil, we can pick Porto Alegre, we can pick Curitiba. They have some rules in the regulatory, using sandbox regulatory, and to kind of incentivize an ecosystem for startups and technology. You think it would be a positive? What is your opinion about the sandbox regulatory? This subject is one of my research also in Universidade Federal do Pará. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So in the book, I talk about regulatory sandboxes, actually. One of the things that I've always been amazed by is there's a group of people in the United States, we call them libertarians, right? These are people who, they don't want any regulation. They just think that that's it. No law at all. They often will criticize something called the precautionary principle. And this is the idea that, it comes out of German environmental regulation in the 1970s, but it's also used today even to think about, like, the idea of the precautionary principle is you don't allow something until it can be shown that it's safe. And one of the examples they use is genetically modified organisms. So corn or other kinds of vegetables that have been genetically modified. No, you can't do that until we can know that it's safe. That's kind of the current Trump administration's policy towards vaccines, which is just insane, but let's just set it aside, right? But the libertarians love to talk about the precautionary principle and how terrible it is. And that instead what we ought to do is have permissionless innovation. Just let people innovate, and then when there's a harm that comes out of it, if there is even, then we come in and we do it. One of the things that's always bothered me about the argument about precautionary principle is that it ignores federalism, right? You do not have to make something banned everywhere, It can be banned in Porto Alegre, just Porto Alegre, right? Or it can be banned in just the state of Washington or in one city, and different cities and states and municipalities and countries can all choose to determine things differently, right? So I'm actually very much a fan of that kind of approach where you have a regulatory sandbox, you allow technology to be largely unfettered for a concrete period of time in order to study it in one region and see how it goes, right? And others can learn from that as well. Now, industry does not always love federalism because it means that sometimes they end up having to comply with a patchwork of different laws. So they begin to lobby the federal system for stronger things that preempt. In America, this amazing thing happened, which there was a big, huge law that became law, and the House Republicans tried to get a rule in the law that said that there was a 10-year moratorium on enforcing any AI law as a state in the United States, right? And it was amazing because it wasn't even standard preemption. Preemption usually means the federal government's decided to do something, so you can't interfere with that as a state. The Federal Aviation Administration controls planes. You can't write plane laws. Do you see what I mean? It's preemption. But this was just like, you can't do anything. We're not doing anything, but neither can you. And it was, much to my relief, spectacularly struck down by the Senate. It was 99-1 against that provision. But the dream of industry would be that. Nobody can do anything, right? The next, which is not realistic, maybe the next best thing would be that there is a pretty lightweight regulation at the top level. But what I'd like to see personally is that kind of experimentation. I think federalism is important. I believe in the idea of the laboratory of ideas, which is part of the way that we justify American federalism, that each state will strike different balances and have different emphases, and then others will learn from them. And that's indeed been what's happened. And, you know, sometimes it has resulted in federal preemption, but the federal government, when it preempts, has the benefit of seeing all the experimentation that occurs first. Do you see what I mean? And so yes, it preempts, but it does so with an educated guess as to what is the best policy. So, yeah. I don't know if we're at time or not, but yeah.
No, great. Well, we reached our time limit, and but it was a great conversation, really. And we are going to upload this debate in our website. As you also, if you would like to hear Ryan, okay, there are many channels where they can find content, but there is one special. Yeah, but there is specifically your intervention in the Brazilian Fórum of Responsible AI yesterday, where you provided just an overview of the U.S. policy in the federal level, and it was then an interesting discussion about this topic. So if you also want to take a look, you are invited to visit our website. Is www.lawgorithm.org.br. And that's it. Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you very much, Monica, Lucas, and Caio. Thank you. It was great to have you all here. Bye.